Season 7, Episode 6, Phantasms. This is another scary Next Generation episode. It's not exactly scary, but it has a creepy tone. It's basically the episode where Data has nightmares and goes a little nuts. We've all been there. It's not the first episode with Data's dreams, but it's definitely the one where it becomes kind of a problem. It's also an episode that has been memed to shit, which is nice. And I think we should just get started. The episode opens up with Data walking down a corridor on the Enterprise, and it's already a little disorienting because he's dreaming. And the corridor seems to go on forever. He meets Geordi, and he tells Data that he wants to install a plasma coil, and he says it's going to be a lot of fun. Data continues walking, and he hears a ringing sound, and he runs into some strange-looking coal miners, and they're ripping apart a wall and some equipment behind it. Data starts making a weird high-pitched noise, and the workers tell him to be quiet, and then they attack him and rip him apart, and Data wakes up. He's been using a dream program for a while now, but it seems like this is his first true nightmare. And the captain's log reveals that they just picked up a new warp core at a starbase, and Geordi has just finished installing it, and they're preparing to test it. And Picard has been invited to the annual Starfleet Admirals Banquet, and he's really not looking forward to it. He says he can't think of anything more tedious than being in a room making small talk with 50 Starfleet Admirals. And he's been invited for the last 6 years, and he's always had a good excuse. But this time, he's out of excuses. And I just hope they're not planning on serving maggots for dinner this time. And also, I'm not sure why Picard, as a captain, is invited to this so-called Admirals Banquet. If I had to guess, it's maybe that Starfleet is kind of grooming Picard for the Admiralty, and maybe has been for a while now. Remember, Picard was a starship captain long before he took command of the Enterprise. And the Enterprise is, of course, the flagship, so that probably puts him a lot closer to the Admirals than most other captains. So maybe that's why they have such an interest in hanging out with him. Who knows? And Data tells Geordi about his strange dreams. He's been preoccupied by them. And a young ensign named Tyler has taken a liking to Geordi. She clearly has a crush on him. But Geordi doesn't want anything to do with her. And he's her commanding officer, so maybe he shouldn't encourage something like that. But it's just kind of funny to see Geordi, who is always struggling when it comes to relationships. Now he finally has a decent opportunity, and he wants nothing to do with it. Although, to be fair, Tyler is a little overzealous and almost a little creepy in her affections for Geordi. And as her superior officer, he kind of has a responsibility to talk to her and at least clear this whole thing up. But he doesn't even want to do that. And they finally get the warp core online, and it doesn't work. And that's putting it mildly. The entire ship seems to shut down, so it seems like they're not going anywhere for a while. Geordi needs to reconfigure the plasma conduits. And in the meantime, Data stares at Spot, and Troy walks in. Geordi asked her to check in on Data because of his disturbing dreams. And Data wonders what Spot could be dreaming about. Troy is more interested in Data's dreams. She encourages him to continue his dream program despite the nightmares. And she quotes Sigmund Freud.
And I think you should allow yourself to experience it. As Sigmund Freud said, dreams are the royal road to the knowledge of the mind.
Thank you, Counselor. I believe I will initiate a dream program now.
Let me know how it goes.
So, Data says goodnight to Troy and Spot and goes to bed. He begins dreaming, and he walks into 10 forward and sees Worf eating a cake with a comm badge on it. Worf says it's a cellular peptide cake with mint frosting, and he's super into it. Data also sees Riker, and he's got a fucking straw sticking out of his head, and Crusher is using it to suck his brains out. There's a phone ringing somewhere, which is interesting. I doubt Data has ever actually heard the sound of a traditional telephone ringing in his life. But he hears one here, and Riker wants him to answer it. Data sees those workers from his previous dream, and Data begins making the same weird shrieking noise. They once again tell him to be quiet, and this time he does, so they leave him alone. And the workers are all crowded around Counselor Troy, who is, at this moment, a fucking cake. The aforementioned cellular peptide cake that Worf is eating. Data grabs a knife, and Troy begs him not to cut into her cake tits, but he can't seem to help it. And then he wakes up, and he's surrounded by Troy, Geordi, and Worf. Data's internal chronometer didn't wake him, which is really not possible. So something is wrong. Geordi examines Data's brain, but he can't find anything unusual. He speculates that Data's dream program was possibly designed to cause side effects like this. Maybe oversleeping from time to time was something that Dr. Sung wanted, which of course is too simple an explanation for this whole episode. So Data decides to create a Sigmund Freud holodeck program, I guess because he's a little embarrassed, if he can be embarrassed, to talk to Troy about this, because she was featured prominently in his dream. So he's going to ask Sigmund Freud what he thinks.
How's it going, Freud, dude?
Das muss ein Traum sein.
And Data explains to Freud that Troy's body was a cake, and that he had an overwhelming desire to cut the cake. And that's when he woke up. And Freud says this.
The image of Counselor Troy, a female, is devoured by you, clearly indicating an unconscious desire to possess your own mother.
But I do not have a mother.
Do not interrupt.
And of course, Freud continues babbling. This program obviously doesn't know or is not taking into account that Data is an android, because Freud is treating Data like he's a human. And he goes on to say this.
The knife, in its violent connotation, suggests a certain feeling of sexual inadequacy.
But I have no sexual desire.
Impotence on top of everything. It is all becoming clear to me now. There might be a paper in this.
So I don't know what Sigmund Freud was actually like, but I hope he didn't take such visible joy in the mental illness of his patients. And does every theory of his lead back to the mother?
Why do you keep asking me these questions?
Tell me about your mother. Would you like a couch to lie on?
No, I don't want a couch to lie on.
Who knows? In any case, Data's had enough of his shit, and he ends the program. I guess he's back to square one. And Admiral Nakamura contacts Picard. He's wondering why he hasn't shown up for the Starfleet shindig. Picard explains that they've had some minor difficulties with their warp core, but he's really looking forward to the banquet. Which, of course, is a lie. And they try the warp drive one more time, and it fails once again. They're not going anywhere. And while Geordi and Data are working on fixing the problem, Geordi hands Data an implement called a brace coil, but it's exactly like the knife in his dream. Data then sees a haunting mouth on the back of Geordi's neck, and he also hears the same ringing from his dream. He sees Riker with a straw in his head, telling him to answer it. So he opens his chest to reveal an old-style rotary phone. Data picks it up and hears Sigmund Freud's voice telling him to kill them all before it's too late. And Geordi manages to snap Data out of it, but this is a problem, because now he's seeing his dream imagery in a waking state. Troy thinks it's more likely a technological problem than a psychological one, but she admits that it sounds like Data is developing a neurosis. And Data is excited by this, which is funny. He has such a desire to be human that he wouldn't even mind being a human with severe mental illness. And it's refreshing to see Troy taking a therapy session with Data seriously. In Star Trek Picard Season 3, she had a therapy session with Data, and she couldn't wait for Data to stop talking. And once he did, she and Riker made fun of him behind his back. I think I might have mentioned it a few times in the past, but just in case you're not aware, I fucking despise Star Trek Picard. But moving on. Troy is walking through a corridor, and it's empty. She seems a little creeped out. She gets in the turbo lift, and Data sneaks through at the last second. And he's got a knife. And he stabs Troy a number of times. It's pretty shocking. Worf and Riker are approaching the turbo lift, and Worf complains to Riker about jazz. He says it's not music, and he calls it shrieking, pounding dissonance, which You know, I don't necessarily disagree, but Worf listens to Klingon opera, which, as we know, is kind of dog shit. So, I think maybe Worf is maybe not the most reliable source when it comes to taste in music, or taste in cake, for that matter. And the turbolift opens and they see Data. They are somehow able to restrain him. I think it's more likely that he just came to his senses finally. And they get Troy to sickbay, and they take Data to the captain. And he explains that he saw a mouth on Troy. And he also saw a straw on Riker's head. These are all images from his dreams, obviously. And he has no rational explanation for it. Geordi can't explain it either. Picard says he has no choice but to relieve Data of duty and confine him to quarters. So, Worf takes Data to his quarters, and he confiscates his phaser. Data asks Worf to look after Spot for him. He's worried that he may end up injuring him. And it's a pretty funny scene.
And you must talk to him. Tell him he is a pretty cat. And a good cat.
I will feed him.
Perhaps that will be enough.
So, Data doesn't have emotions, but he seems very emotionally attached to this cat. He does not want to say goodbye. And I love how the cat is like, why am I being held like this? Do you know who I am? I'm a Hollywood cat. Someone get me a Fresca. And Crusher talks with Riker and Picard. She noticed a rash around Troy's wound. So she examined it with something called an interphasic scanner, and it reveals weird, invisible creatures on Troy. And they're also on the rest of the crew. Everyone is infested with these things. And they're tapping directly into their bloodstream and extracting their cellular peptides, just like Worf's dream cake. But they're kind of out of phase. They're interphasic, is what they call them. And Crusher says if they aren't removed soon, everyone will die. She also examined Data and didn't find any of the creatures on him. But somehow, he's unconsciously perceiving them. So they want to link his neural net to the holodeck so they can observe his dreams and hopefully find some clues as to what they're dealing with. It's pretty wacky. So they start the dream program, and it seems like all the other dreams, except this time Picard and Geordi are in it too. They see Data, but he doesn't pay them any mind. He seems to think that they're just part of his dream. They follow him to 10 forward, and Data offers a piece of the Troy cake to Picard. And they note that the section Data cut out of the cake is roughly the same spot where Data stabbed Troy. They're hearing ringing once again, and the rotary phone inside Data's chest appears. And this is it's just a hilarious image. And this time Picard answers it. And it's once again Sigmund Freud. And he tells Picard to kill them all before it's too late. The room dissolves, and suddenly they're in Freud's office. Freud is apparently a symbolic representation of Data's unconscious mind trying to warn him about the danger. And the workers walk in, and they shoot Sigmund Freud. Oh no. And then they start ripping apart a wall. And Geordi says the instruments behind the wall are the plasma conduits they installed along with the new warp core. Data begins making the same shrieking noise he made before, and it causes the workers pain. They tell him to be quiet, but Picard tells him to keep shrieking. He's basically Black Canary right now. And eventually, it kills them. And Data says he understands now. I'm glad someone does. The workmen are obviously representative of the creatures that are killing everyone and disrupting the ship's functions. And to make another comic book reference in the span of about 30 seconds, they're basically like the Venom symbiote. You know, loud, high-pitched noises really fuck them up. So they sweep the ship with a high-frequency pulse, which destroys them. And they find that the new conduit they brought on board was manufactured using a new process that attracted the creatures to it. No further detail is given. Which I guess is fine, although I gotta wonder if there are any other Federation starships that just had plasma conduits installed using this same method, and if they're also infested with these creatures. Who knows? I guess it doesn't really matter. And it turns out that they're going to be delayed another 6 hours. They will miss the entire Admiral's banquet by then. Oh well. Picard certainly isn't upset about it. He basically tells Geordi to take his time, which is a rarity when it comes to Geordi's engineering work. And Troi brings Data a cake of himself. She figured it was only fair after his bizarre dreams. Data apologizes to her for, stabbing her. Sorry I stabbed you before. I was really tripping bad. And Troi, of course, accepts his apology, and she knows he wasn't in control. And Data speculates about what Freud would say about the symbolism of devouring oneself. And Troi says, sometimes a cake is just a cake. And I love this cake, but at the same time, it's kind of crude when you think about it. I mean, is this the best the replicator can do? Yeah, give me a cake that looks like Commander Data. And this is it? Okay. Overall, I can't say that it's a great episode by any means, but I do enjoy it. It's one of those weird episodes that isn't exactly good, but I enjoy watching it. I mean, the concept of Data dreaming is kind of interesting, but unlike humans, he remembers his dreams in perfect detail, so I'm not even really sure it counts as dreaming. He's just kind of watching and participating in a weird, disjointed movie in his brain. I mean, I guess that's what dreams are, but we don't really recall them the same way Data does. And the episode obviously lays into the idea of symbolism pretty hard. It's interesting how much sexual innuendo there is. I mean, eating the Troi cake, Worf is loving it. Freud even directly points out the weird sexual undertones of it. But also Riker having his brain sucked out through a straw is probably some weird symbolism as well. I mean, you could argue that she's basically giving him head, if you think about it. Although, technically, she's not giving him head, she's stealing it. And Riker is super perturbed about it. And Crusher's role in the episode is kind of hilarious. All she does is find the weird invisible creatures, say they're killing the crew, and other than that, she just sucks Riker's brains out. It's really silly. And it's also interesting that Data is able to kind of perceive these creatures, but Geordi doesn't. They don't really explore the abilities of Geordi's visor all that much. It's kind of a shame because with his visor, he sees better and a lot more than everyone else on the ship, including Data. And it's kind of weird that they seem to forget that sometimes. I'm not saying that he should definitively be able to see these creatures, but it's weird that it's never mentioned. And I get that Data can kind of perceive them, but it's never really explained why it made him so nuts. That's not really clear, but who cares? Doesn't really matter. Like I said, not a great episode, but it is one that I enjoy watching. It's silly, and of the 3 creepy Star Trek episodes I've talked about this month, I think this one is probably the most unsettling overall. So I give it credit for that. But that's about all I got for now. Let me know what you thought of this episode, and stay tuned. There's still one more spooky video coming out on Friday, and it's a doozy. So keep an eye out for that one. But until then, take it easy.
Yes? It's for you.
Picard?
Yes, I know it's a little late, but is it possible to reserve a table for 2 at 8 or 8:30, perhaps?
Who is this?